It's now time for Reset Jamaica. Jamaica has recorded 196 cases of COVID-19, and it begs the question if the country should go on full lockdown. How long will the spread of COVID-19 persist, and therefore how long will the lockdown persist? How soon can normal business activities resume? Will there be a second wave of infection? We welcome Peter Melhedo, President and CEO of the ICD Group Limited, and Norman Horne, Chairman of ARC Manufacturing Limited, to have this discussion. Both gentlemen wrote excellent pieces, one each in the Jamaica Gleaner and the Jamaica Observer. Welcome.
Thank you, Raymond, and good morning.
And
good morning,
Peter.
Good morning.
Morning, morning, Raymond.
First to begin with, thank you both for agreeing to come in. I know that discussion alone, that decision alone was...
But we just took off our masks.
Right, yeah. Viewers, you should know that they both came in practicing social distancing and everything. All right, and just to remind viewers, you can send us a WhatsApp on your own views as to whether or not there should be a total lockdown or not. The numbers are 876-517-2971 or 876-997-2214. All right, so we're going to start with you, Norman.
Yes.
You're literally in the hot seat because your comments would suggest that you're a proponent of a lockdown.
Correct. Correct. Raymond, the argument today is whether or not the country should lock down for a short period of time and get ahead of the curve of coronavirus and then reopen the domestic economy. The fact of the matter is that a lockdown is an imposed restriction on movement. And the purpose for doing this is simple, very simple purpose. Well, it's not simple, but the reason for doing it is to save lives. That's it. There are many different kinds of flu symptoms that doesn't create or cause the percentage of death that this coronavirus has caused. And therefore, every precaution necessary to save lives must be implemented. The fact of the matter is that there are no vaccine for this virus, and there's no treatment for it, so to speak. And therefore, the best solution is social distancing and contact tracing. To date, when we were at 105 cases, we had 5 deaths. That is ranging about 4.25% of persons dying. And the fact of the matter is that for every 21 or 22 persons, 1 person will die. So my argument for temporary lockdown is to ensure that we can reduce as much as possible, if not no death whatsoever. Right. Going forward, we have seen whereby the virus has now skyrocketed. The amount of persons who are now infected have now gotten to about 190, almost 96, almost 200. And therefore, at the end of the day, what we're looking at is if for every 20, 25 persons who are infected, 1 person die, we must implement every measures possible to ensure that we can reduce the death rate from this virus. So it's not about, we understand the economic fallout. We understand jobs will be lost. We understand the economy will go into a recession, but that has to be weighed against the amount of persons will die.
You know, on the other side of the coin, literally, Peter, your article, you provided 5 tenets on which you base the argument that a lockdown, though you said, I think, it's not surprising that people are calling for it, but you presented 5 arguments why there shouldn't be one.
Well, first, I mean, I really respect Norman's point of view, and this thing is so wide and so deep that the problem is really big, and so no policy prescription is going to be great. I mean, where it's going to be trade-offs, there are going to be a lot of things that are unknown, because we're still, everybody in the world is still, there's still a high level of unknown on how long this thing plays out, what the trajectory is, etc. So there are no easy policy prescriptions. My real concern is that we've had an incredibly quick fallout in employment. You just take employment, and many estimates, they say 1.3 million people employed in Jamaica, something 300,000-400,000 people have already lost their jobs. I mean, that's a staggering statistic. And I just think it's hugely important to protect the economy through this in a sensible way, minimizing risk, but keeping businesses that are viable open, allowing them to operate, but at the same time putting in place, stringent measures, yes, limiting movement, etc., but just keeping that valve open enough that we can keep the businesses that are already viable continuing along. And, if you talk about lockdown, and there are different elements to that, you can have a complete lockdown, which, some countries have embarked on, or you can have, kind of a stringent restrictions on movement, but still allow businesses to operate. I'm definitely in the latter category. And the last thing I'd say to Norman is that, we are a small island state, and a lockdown of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, which may be considered in medical terms relatively short, could be devastating for companies that are still just kind of just making their way now and just hanging on.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen with St. Catherine, Norman made a great point. It's a kind of personnel hub of Jamaica. It's a professional class of Jamaica, and certainly we felt in our businesses, huge loss in personnel during this period because St. Catherine. So we've kind of gotten a preview out of St. Catherine, and it will have, a wider situation, will have profound impact on a community really that's really struggling anyhow, just with natural attrition.
Right. No, you speak of natural attrition. Norman gave us the raw number that about 1 in 5 have died when it was at 105.
1 in 20.
1 in 20, yes. Right. Yes. 1 in 5. Apologies. 1 in 20 when it was at 105. It's not 196. Is there a figure that could trigger a change in your views as to whether a lockdown is appropriate, Peter? And similarly, Norman, is there a figure in your view that if we heard that it's crest and started to decline in terms of the new cases, that would allow you to relieve your opinion of the need for a lockdown?
Raymond, the idea of a temporary lockdown for 2 or 3 weeks is to allow the country to get what is commonly described as ahead of the curve.
Right.
The fact is that we are behind on contact tracing, we are behind on testing, right? To date, we have no real numbers as to how many persons are actually infected. And therefore, there has to be a comprehensive approach to identify the persons who are infected and to provide the necessary isolation or quarantine. If we don't limit or impose, if we don't impose social distance and limit persons' movement, then it would be difficult to have contact tracing. Peter, we go to the movies, we go to the restaurants, we go to the supermarkets, we go to the pharmacies, we go to the markets, and then in a day or two, it will be impossible to determine all the persons that you have come in contact with, or I have come in contact with, and so forth. And therefore, the imposed restriction is to limit that, so we can clearly implement a contact tracing program and identify the persons who have had contact with persons with the virus, those who have the virus, and then implement the isolation program and the quarantine program, and then reopen back up the domestic economy.
Right.
Now, I take Peter's point, which are very valid points, that Jamaica already is a fledgling economy. We have just gotten over, past our IMF test, and we have a healthy NIR. We have good employment rates. And now all of a sudden, the gains that we have made in the last 2 years or so, or over the last 6 years, will now be reversed. But these gains are being reversed all over the world. It's a worldwide phenomenon. This recession that we're going to experience here, the entire world obviously is experiencing the same thing. So the question is, do we continue as we are now, right, with limited amount of lockdown, a limited amount of quarantine, and allow this thing to continue to run for 6, 7, 8 or a year? Or do we implement the imposed restriction today for the next 2 or 3 weeks and allow for us to be able to identify persons who are contaminated with the virus and to provide treatment, isolation, etc., and then reopen the economy so all of us can go back to work?
All right, so the concept of reopening the economy so that all of us could go to work is a concept that would preserve the quality, human capacity and labor force, skills and proficiencies that we are currently enjoying. But there is a point made from Peter's article, which interestingly covered your sector, which I thought in preparing for this was interesting. The construction sector, especially not just the larger sites, but the people who would normally be putting on a room, refurbishing their home and stuff like that. So let me ask a question though. With the arguments that Norman has posited, that preserves your labor force in terms of the health of the labor force. What say you on that point?
So I think in my article I point out that we have to make coming to work virtually as safe as staying in your community. Because you take the construction sector, a lot of the folks that come to work are in fairly marginal circumstances at home and in their community. Isolation in say North America and staying home in a lockdown is a very different dynamic than being in marginal circumstances in a community or in your home where you're not alone. There's a lot of ebb and flow, and also you have to actually typically on a daily basis go and get food and get your basics of life. So there is still going to be that movement. So I think for employers we have to make it so that from leaving office to getting to work and being at work and getting home, it is virtually as safe as being in your community. Now, being in your community without income adds a kind of an additional dynamic on top of that, which is, how do I sit still when, my economic circumstances are deteriorating? It's a very hard thing to ask people to do.
What would you say about, if I'm going to make a statement, I'd love to hear both of your opinions on it, that COVID has caused more Jamaicans to discover how more Jamaicans really live. I remember once in a community having a discussion with some youth, and one of them says his dream was to live in a house with cupboards and wardrobes. And initially I couldn't understand it. He says, every article of clothing I own, I either have on today, or what I don't have on today, I will have on tomorrow, and vice versa. Literally as well, a lot of people leave their homes to purchase the meal that they're going to have each time they're going to have a meal. So what would be your remark as to COVID is teaching more Jamaicans about how more Jamaicans live?
Absolutely. And I think if, there will be some, it's hard to see now, but there will be some things some positives that come out of this. And one is that, we have to be super sensitive to everybody's condition, right? We can't just assume, we can't say, boy, I could say I'm going to be okay, but then I can't be okay if the majority of Jamaica is not okay. I don't plan to leave here. I want to live here. So we have to be more community-minded. And by the way, Raymond, to that point, there's significant efforts being spurred by the private sector now to create a kind of a social network that we can help feed people, that we can be out there in the communities and ease some of the burden. Right. And I think those are the kinds of programs and that kind of sensitivity to our environment that we have to pursue. And we as a private sector have to be actively involved in doing that. So yes, absolutely. Hopefully that will come out of this.
Norman?
There's an approach which is referred to as short-term pain, long-term pleasure. And what we're up against as a nation is balancing the fact of reducing the amount of persons that will die as a result of coronavirus.
Right.
I do understand the social consequences. I understand that persons would have lost jobs. I understand the country will go into a recession. Well, we're already in a recession. I understand there will be more demand on government to be able to balance persons' personal economic life. And that healthy $3 billion NIR that will have to tap into it to help those persons who are in need of help. But at the end of the day, right, this is more about preserving life. That's exactly what it's about. It's about preserving lives. 1 in 20 or 1 in 25 persons will die, right? And we need to minimize that as much as possible. When I look at the statistics for New York, where there's approximately 700,000 plus persons infected, and there's about, or the US rather, 700,000 infected, and there are also roughly 41,000 dead. It is suggesting strongly again that over 1 in 5 persons are dying in those countries, not to mention countries like Italy, When you look at Grenada, who locked down early and are now about to reopen their economy. So if we make the short-term sacrifice, Peter, to be able to get ahead of the curve, to be able to identify persons who have been infected with the virus, and so that we can design a program of care for those persons. And you know, interesting enough, Peter, this is a time when all the hotels are closed. And maybe it might be mindful for the authorities to negotiate with the hoteliers to be able to identify room space that we can put these persons who need to be isolated and care for them with proper care in these facilities.
Well, as you mentioned
Yes.
that, two things quickly. One, we already had seen a 54-room property
Yes.
being offered.
And more
Perfect.
to come in that
And more
regard.
to come in that
Perfect.
regard.
Yeah.
So that's
Perfect.
a thumbs
So,
up
yeah.
from the private
Perfect.
sector, which has been very active and at the forefront as well. I want to go secondly to a comment from Andrea, who lives in Portmore, and she's watching the conversation and says, I do believe that it is essential, but consideration must also be given, read the availability of funds to purchase enough foods, medication, gas, etc., to avoid persons going out. Allow this with a 2-week interval, and then she ends by saying, as a country, we'll have to discipline ourselves. So she's right down. Andrea, if you were on the set, you are sitting right between Peter and Norman, because this proves the gravity of the situation that confounds every Jamaican right now.
But Raymond, if I could just respond a bit to Norman. So in my article, I pointed to a number of sectors that are very sensitive to, because they operate in a global environment. And so, you know, if you take the BPO sector, which, you know, has been controversial in recent times, but, you know, if you lock down, so to speak, or if you curtail activities at BPO centers, and we've already seen in St. Catherine, I think, about 2,000 jobs there.
Yeah.
Those are global arrangements. Those are the people who consume those services have options, and they will, once you're seen as an unreliable country, or you break service, they'll move those contracts. Now, we have at last count we had about 38,000 people in that segment.
Right.
If you had this 2-week lockdown, just as an example, and those things would move offshore somewhere else, customers will be very careful about moving back to Jamaica, and certainly not in the short term. So what you would be faced with is massive disjuncture of a huge unemployment, and very importantly, you know, our estimate is about between $400 and $500 million are earned in net remittances from this industry. Foreign exchange is vital for us now. So to curtail that, and you know, to interrupt a business that we've, you know, over a period of 10 years we've built, you know, with, you know, a lot of national effort, Jam Pros, the involvement, the government, you know, we've built this industry, and we're now a player in the industry. To jeopardize that for what is probably now our largest foreign exchange earner,
with tourism
and remittances down sharply. To me, you know, you'd have to really give serious consideration. You'd have to balance a lot of factors. So, you know, there's no easy answer. I think from the private sector perspective, we'd really like a seat at the table in some of these discussions, because, you know, some of them have profound consequences. You know, that could take us years and years. And there's going to be a point on the continuum where our personal safety and our personal health is going to intersect with our economic health. Because if we have, you know, Norman, in a way assumes that there will be jobs to go back to. If we don't have jobs to go back to, and, you know, and 3 weeks in the life of some businesses, especially smaller businesses, a lifetime. I mean, that could be the viability versus inviability. So we have to, so my argument is we really have to balance that while doing all the things, the contact tracing, the aggressive testing, taking care of our senior citizens, the vulnerable people. We absolutely have to. You know, so
on the point of the vulnerability, if you imagine a layer cake and you slice it through, let's talk about, we've been talking about the layer close to the icing, some viewers might think. Let's talk about the layer at the very base of the cake. On Saturday, while moving through St. Catherine to be able to capture some of the sites and understand the impact of day 2 of being allowed to shop alphabetically, the story is told of Gloria, who is given permission to mention this, who sells cane and coconuts just outside of the Bogwalk Gorge, heading to the Bogwalk roundabout. At 1:30 or so Saturday afternoon, Gloria had her first sale, $500 in cane. And it indicated how she became aware that there was a lockdown for St. Catherine. Because she wasn't watching CVM. She was not on anybody's Instagram live. So there are some sections of Jamaica who woke up to the news. And as she said, kudos to the JDF, she said some nice soldiers saw me and said, no, you can't, there's a lockdown, and assisted in getting her back home with her goods. So we speak about 3 weeks, we speak about 14 days, 7 days, well, 3 days to allow for persons to then shop, proved to have been an unimaginable chaos across St. Catherine. Norman, you're a proponent of a full lockdown. Let's say for 14 days. Have you imagined what day 15 in Jamaica could look like for the military, for the police, for the health services, when persons who otherwise were locked in, perhaps without medication and food, the people who need to be dialyzed, who can't be during the lockdown, what would be the sights and sounds of solutions to prevent that kind of national chaos on day 15?
Raymond, and I think Peter is right, there's no easy solution. There is none. And it requires a very balanced approach by our government. And these are the times when we need our government to come to the table and to be able to treat with matters of this kind of urgency. But however that you want to spin this, the issue comes back down, how do we decide who live from who die? That's really what the issue is. Right? And that's the major issue. If we allow this virus to rampantly go through our country, as did Chick V and those, right, what we're going to find is that 5% of our population will die.
Which literally means
that's the crisis.
At least one member of every family.
That is the problem. That is the problem that we have. So that's the major problem with this virus, right, is the percentage of persons that will die. We will wipe out our entire aging population, which are at risk that over 10%, in some cases 12% of those persons will die, right? Those who are 60 years and over are also at higher risk. So it's a serious challenge, and we must preserve life at all costs. Now, I agree that the social conditions of some of our communities and some of the individuals, right, are going to warrant greater levels of intervention in order to balance those. And that is what we should focus on, Peter. How do we balance the social conditions? All of us as business people and as government, those that we can come together in a concerted effort to try and help those who need help.
You mentioned business people and government, as did you. I think academia has been a little late. I know that's probably a self-criticism, but academia has been a little late to the table with proffering solutions. Coming back to our neighbor to the north and the mention of New York, watching some programs, especially in the series yesterday, where there's one particular called The Color of COVID, and there's another called The Wealth of COVID. New Yorkers are also now describing a scenario where perhaps the contagion was made worse because of the lockdown, because some people who need those weird jobs, that's an inelegant word, some people who work at a certain level of the economy, being unable to go out to work, being unable to get medication, being unable to feed themselves, became even more susceptible to contracting the virus. How would you respond to that?
I think that's a massive risk for us. I think all of those, and our demographic pulls against the lockdown because of the things we've spoken about. So I mean, and there are theories about you. Every article seems to contradict the next about is lockdown better, is limited. So the science is still very unsettled. I will say though that if you look at the countries that have done lockdowns, and if you look at the EU, Canada, the US, they've supported it with massive social programs. I mean, they've levered themselves, silly almost, in creating both for businesses and for individuals, right? Frankly, we don't have that capacity. We just don't have the economy. We don't have the resources to do that. So I think we have to be careful of a one-size-fits-all, which is the kind of approach of the kind of orthodox lockdown. Even in a lockdown, emergency or essential services operate, right? And people are being asked to operate these essential services. So my thing is, if we can operate those safely, then we can operate businesses on a wider scale safely. It just means that the employers have to be very diligent. Employees who have now become very sensitive to, or very savvy about what is social distancing, what is safe conditions, also have to hold their employers to account. We have to make sure public transportation, the rules are followed there. And then, as you say, we have to do the aggressive testing, and we have to take care of people who are either indigent, older, susceptible to things. We have to focus our resources on those folks. Because obviously, that's where the life and death scenario comes. So I may be naive, but I believe that we can do a good job of keeping things rolling and making sure we have an economy to go back to and build, as tourism recovers, etc., rather than what I fear will be the worst of both worlds, which is an impaired economy and a social upheaval, because people cannot earn a wage and therefore are not able to live comfortably in a lot.
I stifle a smile. Peter said I may be naive. I may have to look up the meaning of the word naive. Yes, Norman.
Peter and Raymond, the longer we stay in this quarantine environment is the worse it will get. In fact, in my view, it will be far worse than lockdown, because the economy has been deteriorating and will continue to deteriorate in this quarantine environment. We'll never be able to get ahead of the curve. We'll never be able to complete contact tracing and identify the persons who are infected and treat with them. And therefore, we could see this so-called quarantine position continue for the next 6 months. It would have wiped out the entire Jamaican economy. On the converse, that if we are to go to lockdown, as we suggested, which is impose restrictions, so essential businesses will continue, certain businesses will continue, but restrictions of movement will be imposed 24 hours across the country. Contact tracing will not be able to implement this. We have a very sophisticated electioneering process where we have polling stations and we open them and we poll people and we vote. Open the polling stations and use them to do the contact tracing and identify persons who are infected with the virus. And then let us be able to identify every single Jamaican who have a challenge with this virus. As you said, look at the hotels for isolation, look at the quarantine programs. In 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be able to go right through the country. It's a very small country, 3 million people. And then we can reopen this economy and put everybody back to work.
This is when you've been privy to a fulsome discussion, when at the end, the conclusions are as they were at the beginning. What do we do? How do we do it? And how long do we do it for?
Short-term pain, long-term pleasure.
Peter, Norman, two successful Jamaicans that I have a lot of confidence in. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts yesterday and agreeing to come in and share again with us today. I think this conversation will continue long beyond the life of this segment. That's it for Reset Jamaica. We pause for a cause. More Sunrise after these.